Hello and welcome to the final edition of Islington Mill and the monthly podcast series about the cultural life and times of Islington Mill, one of the UK's most beloved artist-led creative and cultural hubs. For this final episode, well, I say it's the final episode, but the reality is this is the penultimate episode, because what I've got coming up for you in this and the next episode, that's going to be dropping tomorrow, is an interview with miqx from the Radical Faeries, and who's also a part of the Islington Mill charity board and has been very heavily involved with the ideals and the vision for Islington Mill as an artistic community in the last 4 or 5 years. I sat down with miqx about 2 weeks ago to record an interview with 2 topics in mind that I wanted to talk about with them. The 2 topics being community and charity. Community being a more broad kind of, what does community mean? How do we form community? That kind of thing. And the charity aspect then going into the more practical applications of what is happening at Islington Mill in regards to charity, what does the charity board do, etc., etc. The more kind of detailed, navigable, down-to-earth kind of structural things about the Islington Mill charity that I wanted to get recorded for the podcast. We ended up having an epic conversation that lasted for almost an hour and a half. So what I've decided to do with these last 2 episodes of Islington Mill and for 2026 is to cut the conversation into 2 portions. The first portion being about community and what that means, and miqx's involvement in queer communities, which spans back for almost half a century now. It's very long in detailed history and very exciting things to talk about within that. And then for part 2 of the final episode of 2025. 2026 is in 3 days' time. For the final episode of Islington Mill and for 2025, we will be looking at the charity aspect of Islington Mill. What does it mean? What does it do? How does it function? And what the ideals of that are. And those will all be coming up in the next edition of Islington Mill and. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to myself with a special guest for the final 2 episodes of Islington Mill and for 2025, miqx of the Radical Faeries, who is also heavily involved with the Islington Mill artistic community and charity. Let's go. Welcome to Islington Mill, and I am joined today by a repeat guest. It's your second time being interviewed by me on the podcast. Welcome to Islington Mill and again, miqx. How's it going?
Yes, it's going pretty well. I've had a rocky few years. The last few years, I've not been very well, and that stopped me engaging. The serious illness stopped me engaging so much in some of the projects I was involved in. But I'm getting back on track now. I've had 2 pieces of surgery. One last year, one earlier this year in October. Yeah, and I'm back on track.
Very good.
Yeah.
I was trying to work out there how long it's been since you were on the podcast the first time. I think actually on that iteration of this podcast, it was still called Islington Mill is Queer.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. And now it's broadened to become Islington Mill and. I think that was about 3 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. It could be slightly longer, actually.
And I was doing the residency project at what's now called Parramatta, where the Dalai Lama is. So
you were, and I interviewed you in one of the back rooms there.
Yeah.
Which is now an office.
Yeah.
So what have you been up to in the time that's passed between the first
apart from trying to survive, we had a lot of things going on during the COVID years, and I was working with projects in Spain and Portugal a lot during those years, even though I was quite ill. But I was also connecting a lot with the global Radical Fairy projects that I was already involved in. We carried on doing a lot of online stuff. In fact, the COVID years were really quite fruitful for that, because we started getting into a lot of online broadcasting, which we hadn't done before. Radical Faeries had not really done that before.
Right, okay, cool.
So we were doing things like regular heart circles on Zoom. We were doing a regular monthly broadcast of a cabaret.
Very good.
On Zoom, which was fantastic as a global feature. We'd never done anything. I don't think anyone had done anything like that. A global queer cabaret. Some people are doing similar things, and that was great. And we're also doing a global monthly sex temple on
Oh.
Zoom. So,
Can I ask you, what does a monthly sex temple involve?
well, it
On Zoom?
Yeah, it depended a lot on who was curating it as to what kind of niche they wanted to occupy. But in general, it was a way of actually moving away from the kind of more corporate pornography styles to being a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more relatable. But, you could imagine there were a lot of people just displaying themselves. Some people were in couples displaying themselves. Some people were even in groups displaying themselves, getting on with stuff. And there was a little bit of chat in between as well. And there was a host who was kind of safeguarding the process.
Sure.
And I was never one of those because I was too busy really hosting the cabaret style things.
Right, okay.
So I couldn't divide myself. So that was quite an entertaining period.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, since COVID ended, the interest in that sort of slackened off.
Yeah.
But we're talking about getting involved with it again. I mean, one of the this all came about through me and others being involved in faenet.org, which is a website you can go to. It's a social media platform. It's faenet.org. And that social media platform we created before COVID started. But COVID gave us the opportunity to branch out in different ways. And unfortunately, just after COVID, we had various technical problems with Faenet, which meant that the engagement with the global fairy community dropped quite a lot.
Right.
And as I said earlier, my main interest is in building community in all sorts of different ways, globally, locally, with Radical Faeries, with queer community, and indeed with the general public, if that's what they want to do, in ecological stuff as well. So after COVID, because of our technical problems with Faenet, interest and engagement dropped off, and we're actually in the process. One of the major projects I'm engaged in now is to try and revive Faenet. We had some technical problems. We're getting over those. We're working with another group called the Global Radical Fairy Newsletter.
Okay.
And we've partnered up with them to actually reach out across the world, really, to reach out to global radical fairies wherever they are. Mm-hmm. It's still early days for that, but at the moment we're still getting engagement with about 4,000 people monthly.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all. Yeah.
It's just before we go on to talk about the kind of meat and potatoes of the podcast, it is interesting to just reflect a bit on, you've used the phrase, the COVID years.
Yeah.
And it's quite, I'm just suddenly thinking about, oh yeah. But I'm also kind of like, are we truly out of the COVID era? I know that restrictions and stuff have been dropped.
Yeah.
But I still feel like, I don't know how I feel about it. Like, it's still a pandemic. Yeah. It's still out there. People are still catching it. People are still dying, even though most of the Western countries have dropped all pretense of masking up and social distancing and stuff like that. But I'm just, sorry, just off on a bit of a tangent here. I'm just going to kind of reflect of I still kind of feel like we're in the COVID years in a broad sense, because I think that some of the changes socially that happened during that we're still catching up with. Yeah,
here in the UK, we don't have hardly any restrictions.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I think the problem may be that it may mutate again. On the other hand, we may see a completely different pandemic happening, because the world is in a global health crisis. Yeah. And there's a lot of problems with the pharmaceutical industry not providing the medications that it can do. This is, like I just said, I was working with World AIDS Day just recently. We're just still in the first week of December now, or second week of December rather. And so I was doing a lot recently with World AIDS Day, and we were trying to emphasize the fact that because of the defunding in healthcare generally, but especially with HIV, all over the world, the rich countries have stopped funding HIV care, and not just the treatments, but the additional healthcare that goes along with it. It means now a lot more people are starting to die over the world. And of course, there's a dual diagnosis, compromised illnesses, and that's going to result in not just COVID, but also mutations of HIV and other diseases as well, because the global fund, the UN global fund, has been cut so much. And
that's really interesting to hear you say that, because from my point of view here in the UK, I'm on PrEP. I take PrEP daily. I get a free prescription of PrEP through the local sexual health clinic, and just in my limited experience of that, it feels like the AIDS epidemic is kind of being bottled a bit, or being kind of like boxed now, rolling out PrEP to everybody who's engaged in queer sex who wants it for free. And from what I've heard, the figures of transmission have fallen quite a lot.
In local areas, in certain parts of the world, they have. But for example, what's just happened with the Trump cuts and other cuts, the figures are starting to rise again. There was hope, and still is realistic hope, that we could end the transmission of AIDS by 2030.
Wow!
Because of the drugs are there, the potential for healthcare is there, but with the cuts, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So unless this is looked at again, and it can be looked at again, and hopefully it will be looked at again, the transmission will increase globally. People will start dying in more numbers over the world, and there will almost certainly at some point be mutations of the virus that will ultimately come back to Europe and the USA. And that will cause problems because we won't have the drugs for those mutations. So instead of solving the problem by 2030, if we don't act, and we still can act, but if we don't act, we're building up problems for ourselves. And the same is true for COVID. Because the big pharmaceutical industry is not necessarily addressing the problem in the best way possible. They're still looking for profits and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So again, if they don't look at treating the whole world globally, because germs and bacteria and stuff, viruses, they don't regard borders as any kind of barrier. So unless there is a kind of global health program, these things will get out of hand again, and it's preventable. It really is preventable.
Yeah.
But the selfish countries, if they don't look at it in that way, will find themselves on the receiving end of the consequences in due course. It might take some time, but in due course that will happen.
Yeah.
Hopefully it won't. I mean, it's just like the climate crisis. People can do something about it, but they're not. You know.
Yeah. Oh, I've mixed feelings on that as well, because it's like, there's a limit to personal responsibility when it's individuals of private planes who are flying around the world.
Absolutely.
Blah, 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 blah.
Absolutely.
Don't want to get into that right now.
Yeah.
But I completely take your point.
And this gets me back to what I was saying about building community, because you can see that the well-off areas of the world have a different aspect to the talk of community than the less privileged aspects of the world.
Right.
Community is very distinct in those ways, and the interests of the more privileged areas are not being served by the global programs because they're really looking after the wealthy. Yeah. To be blunt.
Yeah.
And they don't foresee that by not looking after the whole world, they're causing problems, because they feel that they'll be able to retreat behind some kind of sanitized wall of sorts, and they feel that they'll be protected in some way.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately they won't be, but that's what they feel. So I think what we can do to actually address all of these issues, is actually build up grassroots community. And that's basically the political stance I've taken.
Okay.
That relates to here at Islington Mill, and it relates to all the other stuff I'm doing with queer community and other.
Sure. I'm going to come back to the specifics about what's happening at Islington Mill in a moment, but I just want to double back there on what you were talking about between the difference between how community is regarded in states and places with a certain level of affluence, and how it's different in places that are a lot poorer. You touched on that a little bit there, but can I just ask you, do you have any is there a kind of not soundbite, you can take as long to talk about it as you want. What are the differences? What are the differences between community that you've seen in places that are more affluent and then places that are a lot less?
Yeah. Well, you could talk about it in terms of class, and I think it's quite useful to talk about it in terms of class. And in terms of class, the people with wealth, with access to resources, build community to protect themselves, basically. And it's not done as a conspiracy, I think, as such, but it's just done by people, knowing and knowing that they've got to look after their interest and protect their buddies as people would. And it's a natural human instinct in some ways to actually protect people that you see as your allies. And so it's not necessarily evil, but it ends up being evil because they're actually safeguarding their resources for themselves and ultimately then withholding resources from people who don't have that good access. And that means communities who are less privileged, less wealthy, more marginalized, don't have access to resources, don't have access to finance, don't have access to communication. Very often you can see how the media has been controlled globally now by certain media giants that set the agenda to suit their interests. And that means that the less privileged people see the world through the frame eyes of these global corporates. They get the agenda, the news agenda that's fed to them. They get, in a sense, brainwashed by the media into believing and accepting things that the media want them to accept and believe in. And that means it's much, much harder for the marginalized communities to actually resource themselves. And they get divided. They get very easily divided against each other because it's in interest, divide and rule is as old as the humanity, really.
And when resources are scarce, that's an effect of that.
So community operates very differently amongst marginalized communities than it does with the more privileged communities. And this is what, you've got to talk in terms of politics. We have to, in my view, empower the marginalized communities to subvert this process of globalized media and globalized resource getting so that people locally, wherever they are in the world, can find their voice, first of all, can find each other, first of all, can find common cause with each other, can learn how to communicate that goes around the controls of the global media. And this is, again, why we're working with FAYNET for the queer community and the Radical Fairy community specifically, but also for the queer community. And this is why I'm a co-founder of the Queer Spirit Festival. And this is also why we're trying to build a real sense of community. I don't knock online communities. I think they're very useful for connecting people, especially across distances, people who might never meet in real life. But it's not a substitute for real life.
Sure.
And I think we have to also start thinking about how do we connect with real people that we meet every day and that are actually part of our living lives. And a lot of people now, because of all sorts of factors, but I'll say, COVID and other things to do with online separation, a lot of people now are losing skills, social skills, losing the confidence to build a social life that they used to have. That human society used to nurture almost organically without thinking about it. And so I think this is where community building comes in, is to actually help people rebuild those social skills, gain confidence, gain a sense of safety and trust, because trust is humongously undermined by these operations of separation of people. And trust has been broken down so much globally. Fear has increased exponentially. You can see this with the fear of the other, with migrants, fear of whoever else doesn't fit in, is demonized or feared at the very least. And that's because of this breakdown in sense of community a lot of the time. And so people become conditioned to have a them and us attitude.
Would it, okay, I'm just going to throw a little devil's advocate kind of thing out here and say, but surely the othering is a factor within building communities in terms of we're not them. If you're taking it from a point of view of like, well, we're outsiders because we can't access the resources, that's also an us and them kind of thing. And I'm just wondering, this is just a bit of a highfalutin, just a little something to throw out there. Because I do think about this stuff all the time. And those points that you were making just there about the difference between community building on the internet and the difference between community building in real life. That's very prescient. And I see that happening all the time, especially within activist and cultural communities as well. And I do worry for the generation that COVID hit them just at the age when they should have been going to university or high school, like graduating high school, and all these important social watermarks within their life that should have been done in real life with other people present were done online. And it does make me wonder about, is this going to have a knock-on effect in the future in terms of trying to build community because people aren't going out and meeting face to face and dealing with the nuance of sitting opposite a person and looking into their eyes as they're telling you something that you maybe don't agree with, but you're not confronting them about it, or it's not becoming this kind of like win-lose situation or life and death situation, whereas on the internet, everything is just becoming so polarized that like small infractions seem like the biggest thing. But I do also wonder if that's always been the case, because like I said, like, is an aspect of community building othering people?
It can be. It absolutely can be. And I think that's why I always revert back to the word intersectional.
Okay.
Because, and I think that, you know, when you look at people who think about politics in a strategic fashion, you can see that the old style of the left was to build solidarity for that very reason.
Yeah.
You know, it was quite a prominent word a few years ago. People don't really know in practice what it means now. They know the word, obviously, solidarity, but the practice of solidarity is really broken down. And people have kind of gone back into their silos, as you say, very often to protect their own interests because of this fear-mongering that's going on. And that I think is a deliberate strategy by some parts of the world. Not everybody, but there are some people in the world who are cultivating this strategy of fear-mongering because it enables them to reap the profits from that.
Sure.
Because, you know, fear can be profitalized. What's the word? But anyway, you can capitalize on fear to make money.
Yeah.
You can capitalize on fear to make money, basically. And they do that very successfully. I mean, the people with resources have actually hired people with psychology degrees and all this kind of research into neurodivergence. They've hired those people to give them the resources as to how to divide and rule better than they used to.
Yeah.
And they're actually putting those into operation. It's not a thing of the future. It's happening right now.
Yeah.
And people are beginning to feel the effects of that very strongly all over the world by saying, you know, we must protect ourselves locally because, you know, the global forces are against us, or the forces that are not of our religion are against us, or the forces that are not of our nationality are against us. So people are going back into these silos, and yes, they're building community in a very fear-mongering kind of way. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking very much about getting back to a sense of intersectionality, of realizing that the power struggles of the marginalized are need to be united across these barriers of fear. We need to recognize that other people's struggles are our struggles, and to have an understanding of our commonality in working together in ways that actually get around this kind of globalized imposition by the powerful and the rich and the privileged.
Well, here's the $64 million question. How do we do that?
It's difficult. I'm not saying it's easy. They do have money. They do have resources. They do have access to all sorts of things that people who without privilege don't have access to. They have access to the best kinds of learnings, the access to the science, access to all sorts of technology that we don't have access to, and they're using that. However, we still do have, I say we in the sense of ordinary people, without those, still do have the power to talk to each other locally, first of all, which is what we're doing here right now. And as part of the mill, as part of Salford, we have the capacity to build a sense of what's going on, for example, not just in Salford, but in Greater Manchester, and in the north of England, and then ultimately in the whole United Kingdom, and then ultimately in all of Europe, and then ultimately in all of the world. So we can ripple out from our global stance into seeing wider and wider circles that we can keep engaging in. And I'm having the time of my life in a way, because I'm passionate about this, and doing both local things, regional things, national things, and global things. And it's hard work because, you know, you have to recognize that you can't just build community on one level. You have to actually start from that local level, but then engage with that local level into the wider world in some way.
Yeah.
And that's really what I'm doing with all the projects that I'm doing. I'm doing community network building from the local level outward into the regional, national level, the continental level through Europe, North America, and North Africa, Southwest Asia, ultimately going on to North America, South America, and the rest of the world. But it's difficulty. It's not easy. But I think what happened with online tools is that it has started to connect us globally. And although the typical online conversations are very divisive, there are also resources online now which can connect you to like-minded people that you don't find locally.
Yeah.
So there are some areas, where you feel isolated because nobody in your locality is thinking like you.
Yeah.
But you can find those people online.
Yeah.
And therefore, that's a resource that can be used for our benefit.
I think like there's an entire generation of people who, Gen Z and the younger millennials, I was able to witness this, who found so much of each other and their gender and sexual expression through the internet and through, which is funny. It's why I ask about that kind of thing, because we are in an era right now, and it's got a name, which is the inshitification of the internet era, where it's becoming more and more monopolized by a smaller and smaller group of companies, but it feels like their agenda is to actually strip the internet of the capabilities and powers that you used to have 30 years ago, so they can continue to monopolize it and use it as a tool of social control, more so than a tool of genuine expression of various different groups and individuals as well. And that's why I brought up that point about, is othering people a central concept of community anyway? Because I've been around long enough to been on the internet for like 20 years now, and like, that's not even that long. Like my partner's been on the internet for 30 years. And there's always been an aspect, it's had both always. There's always been an aspect of like linking up with people who share very similar niche interests to you, no matter what they are, regardless of like gender or sexuality. It could be just artistic, just like, things, finding people who the same kind of nerdy fandoms as you. But also, then there will also be the people who disagree with you, and it becomes very combative, and it's like, well, I'm not like that, and that becomes a part of the forming of an identity of a community as well. I think, I'm not 100% sure, but it feels like that in my experience.
It does happen that way, and I despair about it a little bit, but I think what we have to do, first of all, and this is what I'm trying to do with FaeNet and the Global Radical Fairy Network, and with Radical Fairies, because we are a global network of people, of queer community. What we're trying to do is actually move from that kind of internet discussion into actually incorporating the reality of those relationships into our real life. So we're not just shouting at each other on the internet, but we're actually getting to know each other. And you can actually get to know each other via the internet. You can actually have one-to-one conversations that get round all of these sort of shouting at each other conversations. I'm sure they're going to continue, because the whole subject is fraught with bots dividing us.
Sure, that's another aspect of the inshitification of the internet, is all the bots.
And as I say, these are deliberate strategies by the people who want to divide us. What we're doing with FaeNet is we're building a non-commercial operation that aims to have social media that connects people, say first with Radical Faeries, but ultimately with any queer communities, and hopefully ultimately with all people, but we haven't got there yet. So we're hoping to use open source software rather than relying on the corporate software. It's difficult because we don't have the skills, we don't have the technology, we don't have the players in the game that they have. But it can be done. It's, people who have a very consumerist mindset will look at what we're doing with FaeNet, with Queer Spirit, and with what's going on here at Islington Mill, and they will look at us and say, well, yeah, but it's not very slick. It's not very glossy. I can get this a much better product elsewhere. And you can get a much better product elsewhere that is more slick, more efficient, and, with lots of features. And people go, oh, that's shiny and new. That's lovely. I'd rather buy that, because they're so seduced by all these, beautiful things,
Yeah.
But I think what we can do is actually, even though we haven't got the super skills, we have got some skills to build up grassroots newsletters, zines, podcasts, all these kind of things that we're doing right now.
Yeah.
We have those skills to actually build up a reality that opposes.
Yeah, and I'd also say never discount the actual genuine attractiveness of something that's a bit more grotty.
Yeah, yeah.
Because growing up as an alternative kid, like, I was surrounded by slick, shiny stuff, but that wasn't the stuff that genuinely attracted me. When I found something that was like, had a bit more edge and like, just even like on a basic level, like record sleeves. Like, you'd see a record sleeve, like, for instance, you know, a Pink Floyd album cover, which obviously Battersea Power Station, and it's this whole setup, and it's got like post-production on it and stuff. And then you'd see something that was photocopied, and it was just these people like really grotty looking photocopied insert into a 7-inch record, and it was just like, I know which one I'm more interested in hearing.
Yeah.
You know,
I totally celebrate the 70s DIY culture that erupted after the hippies. You know, the hippies did start it, but they didn't perpetuate it. And the punk culture, the DIY culture that came afterwards, oh my God, I so much, that is me. That was what I really celebrated. The DIY rave scene, all these kind of things that are, they're really, really empowering, and that, you know, I want to see more of that in the world.
And that feels like something that's been kind of stripped out of the internet as well.
Yeah,
the do-it-yourself aspect, like what you're saying about like a new iteration will come along with like shiny buttons and blah blah. And I see this with social media all the time, where it's like, look, I'm old. I'm not invested in social media as much as somebody who's say 20, 25, and can potentially use that as a tool to make an income for themselves. Like, that's their reality. Like. And every time there's a rollout and it's all this new functionality, to be honest with you, it just pisses me off. I'm just like, leave it the way it was so that people just know exactly how to use it. But again, that's another aspect of how they're trying to shitify the internet by stripping away the actual functionality of it that is really positive and just replacing it with like slight tweaks on all these functions that nobody really actually gives a shit about.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just... Yeah, it's interesting talking about this stuff in terms of the internet. Yeah. Because while, like we said earlier, and you said yourself, like, it's very important to do community activism and connecting with people in real life, I think the internet is the kind of place where you can see it happening, like, and you can see all these different things at play, much more than you can in real life, because in real life you don't know what somebody's thinking, or you don't know the politics, or where are we, all the extraneous factors. On the internet, it's just there in black and white, and you can see the faults in all this stuff very clearly.
Oh, absolutely. You know, it's a form of seduction. And getting back to the queer world, you can see how we're being seduced from our grassroots culture of going to local clubs and local scenes into looking at our culture through the eyes of the internet. Yeah, and I'm really interested in the last few years, the little gay and queer reels have become very popular. Yeah, and like people have started their own YouTube channels. People have aspiring now to be influencers. Yeah. You know, the young generation. Yeah. And it's very similar to what happened in the class struggle, where the working class got seduced into being middle-class managers. That was the aspiration, if you were a working class person, to get a nice office job as a middle class manager type. Yeah. And then you left your working class roots behind, and you became part of the management system. Yeah. And you stopped identifying with the marginalized culture that you came from, or the oppressed culture that you came from, and started identifying with I'm producing now. Yeah. I'm a producer of stuff. Yeah. Of product. Yeah. And therefore I'm looking for consumers to produce who I am, to consume who I am rather. Yeah. And so now a lot of young queers are saying, like, I'm above you now. I've got this little niche where I produce my fancy reels. I've got loads of followers. Yeah. Look at me. Yeah. And you can be successful like me now. And people aspire to that now in a way that they didn't used to aspire. They might have aspired to be a local drag queen, or be on a parade somewhere. Yeah. But now their aspirations are to induce people to give them money for being, OnlyFans or little show reels or YouTube channel or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's not only in the queer culture, obviously, but I think it's really subverting the queer culture from our kind of grassroots that we used to have, that we used to be able to rely on within the queer world. We used to always say we're safe from that because we know each other in our queer spaces and we trust each other because we build up this stuff. Actually, it's being subverted by the internet because of people being sucked into this. Be a producer, be an influencer, sell people who you are.
Yeah.
And instead of being a reality of a real person, you're selling yourself as a fake product. And I think that's really damaging people's identity. Ultimately, they might get some fun out of it for a while, but in the long run, they'll come to grief.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, as someone who's dipped in and out of that, it is, and it can be, a very direct way of making an income.
Yes.
Which is valid.
Absolutely.
It's just like you have to get your coin to survive in this world. But I do agree with what you're saying there, because before and out with doing that kind of influencey stuff myself, I see myself as an artist and a producer of music and a producer of podcasts and just a producer of culture generally in whatever form that I can put it out there. And one of the things that I find really interesting about what you're talking about there, kind of influencer culture and stuff, it's taking the energy that people have to be creators and to be artists. And the way I see it, it's funneling it into consumerism. So rather than creating anything that's real or new or comes from their soul or their spirit, they're basically refracting how they can be creatively consumers more than they are creating something. And I think this is something I talked about with my partner recently when we were talking about Marvel movies and how, like, the kind of Marvel era that was there in the 2010s where all their films are making $1 billion each is over. Like, all that Marvel has to offer now is people who will spend a lot of money on a monthly stream of comic books that are being produced and then will turn around on the internet and tell everyone else what's going on in that world at that time through their collection of these comic books that they're consuming. And it's really, to me, it's taking the energy of people creating their own comic books, for instance,
absolutely, yes,
and channeling it into, well, you need to be a kind of productive consumer. And I don't know exactly what the word prosumer means. I know he's a DJ in that. But that to me is kind of what this is. It's taking the energy of people being artists and being producers of culture in their own right and subverting it into being consumers, but then giving them a kind of like aftertaste of, oh, but you are a producer, you are creative, look at how creative you are, talking about your unboxing of all the Marvel things or whatever it is that you do, or your makeup tutorials. It's like, yes, girl, you've got a lovely face beat, but how much did you spend on those boxes to get that face beat? You know what I mean? It's
absolutely, and people being sucked into this sort of capitalist consumerist food chain, as it were, and they become part of that food chain, which is like a pyramid project in a way, rather than actually owning their own stuff. And I talked about this. We at IMAnd recently, the Islington Mill Arts Academy. We had a gap, and I stepped into that gap to actually offer a talk on the art of community. And this, and I touched very much on this, on how art, instead of being used, I believe the beautiful gift of art is to help create community. Art can be such a wonderful creator and supporter and builder of community. But what historically, and not just now, but all through human history, what's happened with art is that artists have had to seek wealthy patrons, and ultimately their art serves the wealthy patrons. Because they're the ones with the money, and people who want to get on, naturally, if they've got a gift, they create for their wealthy patrons. And we're seeing something similar in this world now, is that we don't have the same kind of wealthy local patron as they used to have in Renaissance Italy, for example. But we do have now a kind of global rich network of capitalist consumerist food chain that we serve as artists, if we choose to. And it makes it very difficult for us to do our own DIY art or, with any sense of recognition, because we might get a couple of friends who like it, but we don't really have the cachet that an influencer has.
Yeah. There seemed to be a moment during the COVID years, as that was a topic that was brought up earlier. Yeah. There did seem to be a moment within the COVID years when it felt like artistic finance in that way might be being redrawn, in terms of people were setting up a lot of like GoFundMe's, Patreon pages, Indiegogo campaign, all that kind of stuff, where people basically like cap in hand, busking like your guitar case or your hat on the street when you're busking, kind of stuff, and looking for people to donate, but also kind of like do their own evaluation of how much what you're doing is worth, and being able to put that in themselves. And for a while it seemed to be working, and like I said, like when I was in my kind of peak influencer phase, it was working for me too, in terms of being able to bring in a regular income stream, which is very important when you're an artist, when you're a human being living in capitalism.
Absolutely.
But it seems even since like the last 2-3 years, that's kind of faded out again. And I think some people are using a kind of subscription model, and probably are, having nice lives and, fairly comfortable financially out of it. But it is interesting that I thought that stuff was being redrawn a lot during the pandemic. But now that we've come out of the pandemic, it feels like it's just reverted back even more forcefully to what it was before, which was that kind of like single patron model that you were talking about. Because I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with patronage if it's a community or an audience that is supplying the patronage, rather than a singular producer producing a content and then selling that to an audience. If an audience themselves are willing to put in the money for the thing to be produced, I think that's quite good.
Yes.
Or at least theoretically it is anyway. Yes. It depends on what the audience are after. Like if it's something negative, then that's not good.
Yeah.
But in terms of with redrawing the boundaries of how artists can make a living through their art, there just seemed to be a ray of light cracking in there a few years ago, but I just don't know if it's there anymore.
Yeah, I'm not saying I've got total solutions in my head. This is something to be worked out together with people. And I don't think it's for one person to say what the solution is. But I do think we do value art as human beings. We do value art. And I think I would just say to people, check your politics. What is your art for? Is your art there to service community, to support people, not just yourself? Obviously you have to earn a living, but is your art for some? What is the purpose of your art? Is it there to actually feed into this consumerist capitalist food chain, or is there another purpose behind your art? Yeah. And if your art is in service to some other kind of purpose, then you're probably okay on the right track. Because you're building community, you're creating a supportive network, and that's good. And you can still earn a living in some way to that. You might not reach the heights of Madonna or whatever, whoever's the latest fashion, but you're still kind of earning your way. And I think what we have to do, I believe, is create a community of collaborators.
Okay.
And artists that collaborate together, that feed off each other, that create a collaborative scene that sustains itself, basically. And I think that's what's valuable here about Islington Mill.
Yeah.
We actually can start to do that here. In reality, we're not under threat of losing the building, for example. We're relatively secure in a way that many other places aren't.
True.
And so we can here build from the bottom up a collaborative community of artists that helps to sustain a different pattern of working together that still enables us to live and work as artists, but doesn't feed into this kind of really what I'm calling the capitalist consumerist food chain. And obviously we can interact with that because it's almost impossible not to interact with that. Yeah. But there are other ways around it, I think. And this is why I come to Islington Mill, because I don't see many other opportunities given to us. I mean, look at the local music networks. They're very hard now to sustain local music networks.
Yeah.
When I was younger, and even right into 10 years ago, there used to be many more local music venues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where you could start up as a relatively unskilled performer, learn your trade, and eventually become a professional musician. It's very hard to find those venues now. A lot of the venues have closed down. So we've got to actually kind of build those venues again from the roots up, wherever we can and however we can, even if it's just busking in the park to begin with, And I know that, the powers that be keep shutting down those kind of things. To play music in open spaces now, in public spaces, is getting more and more difficult.
Yeah.
And you can see how the powers that be, and I call them that because there's a whole multiplicity of different powers.
I like that. It's a much better phrase than saying the 1% or the elite they.
Yeah.
They don't want to, but like powers that be, they are in power. And they do be.
And some of them are trying to be good, and some of them are not very good, and some of them are actively bad. But all of them have the capacity to be better than they are, and all of us have the capacity to influence them to some degree, because they rely on us for feedback ultimately. That is the weakness that they have. They rely on us as consumers, even if we're just consumers. They rely on our consumer feedback to say that we don't like this, we want something else, and we will not buy what you're trying to sell us because we want something else. So I think that is the ultimate power that we have from the grassroots. And it's limited as an individual, but go back to solidarity, go back to intersectionality, go back to growing awareness amongst and between marginalised communities. We have a greater strength than we know once we start reconnecting on that level.
And I'm going to end part one of my conversation with miqx there. So come back tomorrow where you'll be able to hear part two of the conversation, where we start talking about charity, specifically the Islington Mill charity and how that functions, but also charity in general and what does it mean and what should it ideally be doing. And if you're interested in hearing more about miqx's own personal history, which is incredibly fascinating and very rich in terms of involvement with various different queer communities and radical activism themselves over the past almost 50 years, I'd say, at least at this point. If you go to the Islington Mill and podcast page, wherever it is that you're picking this podcast up on all the major platforms, and you scroll back a bit, you should be able to find an interview I did with miqx about 4 years ago. And I believe it was when the podcast was still called Islington Mill is Queer. But they've got a very detailed, rich history of involvement in all this kind of stuff, and it is really worth listening to. So take a trip back about 4 years ago through this podcast page until you find that one. That's the original interview with miqx that I did, I think it was in 2021. And also come back tomorrow when you can hear the next part, the rest of this conversation, where we talk about charity, including the Islington Mill charity and how that functions and what the plans are for that moving forward. And that's all I got for you for now, but come back tomorrow and you will hear the rest of this. Goodbye.